Hey everybody, I'm Rocco DiSpirito. I'm a chef. I live in New York City. I've been cooking since I was 11 years old. It was not legal. I know you're about to ask me. It was not legal to cook and work at that time, but it was 1977 in Queens, in New York, and the rules were, a little easier to bend back then than they are now. But I can tell you what, the first day I worked in this pizzeria that I worked in, Sal's Pizzeria, I felt absolute freedom and independence that to this day I feel, and I thank the restaurant industry for. It's an amazing feeling, really wonderful.
What led you to a kitchen?
So I wanted this album called Love Gun by Kiss, and my mother hated Kiss. My mom, who's from Italy and came to America when she was in her mid-30s, didn't quite understand, glam rock and makeup and all that. So she thought that they were like devils for real. So we had a big fight about this album called Love Gun, and she told me, hey, Rocco, if you wanted this devils of a music, you gotta go to work yourself and get your own money and buy it with your own money. And I was like, I can do that? I can go to work? Great, I'll do that. At 11, I don't know why I thought that was great, but I thought it was great. Yeah. So the next day, with her permission, we walked all over my neighborhood, which is, a neighborhood in Queens, so there's like 1,000 stores per block. And Sal is the first guy who said he'd hire me, and he hired me to scoop Italian ice, cut pizza, fill fountain sodas. He paid me 50 cents an hour, and I was ecstatic because I never had more than $1 in my pocket. And he would also pay me in Italian ice, which was one of my favorite things ever. So I learned a couple things right off the bat. Number one, if you work in the kitchen, you're always going to be in a sort of like fun, jovial environment, right? Because people are happy, they're eating pizza and they're scooping Italian. It's like a great environment. You're always going to be fed, and it won't be cold. You'll never be cold because kitchens are really hot places. And at my stage in my life, those were important things for me, And I never stopped working in the restaurant business. I started at 11 and I never stopped. So 1977 to 2020. I've been working in restaurants for that whole time.
Yeah, normally when you're young, you think like, this is what I'm going to do when I grow up, but you just threw yourself right in, and then there was no other thing that you wanted to do.
No, I thought I was going to be a lawyer when I grew up, and then that plan obviously got derailed a little bit. I thought I was going to be a lawyer till, I don't know, 16, 17, and then slowly the kitchen, got into me and became part of my molecular structure, and it was just such a wonderful experience. The whole process was illuminating in so many ways. I didn't realize I could be independent. I could learn a skill. I could interact with people and make them feel joy, through food, which of course is super easy, right?
Right.
Pizza.
Everyone's happy when
pizza,
they're eating.
Right. What makes people happier than pizza? And then around 14, 15, 16, I started to realize that I really liked the skill of cooking. It wasn't just about making money anymore. The skills that I was learning, and so I was starting to see that your point of view can also be expressed in cooking. I was just starting to see the beginnings of that. And so I thought I should take this to the next level, and I asked around, everyone said you should go to the Culinary Institute of America. It's the best school. It's the best cooking school. So I applied there and I got in and I went there and I worked in New York City for my externship or internship. I don't know what they call them anymore, but yeah, it's like you work free for a few months.
Oh yeah.
And I did a big hotel opening, and my friends were at Le Cirque and Jean Georges, and there's so many. It's such a rich world with so many amazing people in it, and in a place like New York City, where on every other block there's a 3-star, 2-star restaurant now. It's for a curious kid who's not sure, what they want to do or how they're going to become independent and make money in life. Checking out restaurants is definitely a great first step.
Right. Restaurants are the greatest first job because they either are where you want to go or they are a means to where you want to go.
Right.
And so
right.
I worked in the restaurant for 10 years, paid for my entire college tuition.
Amazing.
With no loans.
That's incredible.
And restaurants allowed me to do that financially, but then they also did the things that you just said.
Right.
They teach you assertiveness, to talk to people you don't know.
Right.
It's fun. I think it's a fabulous thing for young people to do.
Yeah. Restaurants don't make a lot of money. 98 cents out of every dollar goes right back out the door to pay for food, to pay for labor, to pay for rent. So it's really a business that generates a lot of additional revenue up and down the supply chain. So you're doing good. You're helping to create a community. You're helping a community to stay strong and exist.
Well, and food brings people together. I mean,
gives them a reason to stay at one place for a little bit longer than the usual 5-minute interaction. It gives people opportunity for communion, for celebration, to enjoy the company of each other and see what happens in that space between people. I always talk about the space between people in the world of dining and even eating at home, and the possibility of what's possible in that moment, right? And there's so much that's possible. I come from Italian roots, so the space between people at an Italian table is insane, right? We're always laughing, and there's always something funny to be, said or heard, and something great to eat, and lots of love. And so it's a really very special environment if you can create that.
Right.
Yeah. But the first step is learning one of the skills that a restaurant needs, right? So it's either waiting tables or cooking. I happen to think cooking is the best skill of all the skills, but no, it's if you look at a restaurant, you can't be successful if the food isn't good. Yeah, I mean, you can't. There is no restaurant without food, right? Yeah.
So what is your current situation? What are you currently doing? I know you've
I'm a cookbook
recently.
author, and I'm working on my next one, which is a plant-based cookbook, plant-based keto cookbook.
And is that how you eat?
Yes, that's how I try to eat. And I also run a home food delivery service where I create bespoke menus for people who are trying to reverse disease or lose weight, and I create nutrition programs for them and execute the food on those programs and monitor them and help them, coach them, and help them get to their goal.
So what inspired that? Because that seems to be...
So my own declining health 15 or 20 years ago now. I was attempting to do a triathlon, and I just couldn't do it. I couldn't walk a block. I couldn't do anything. And a doctor I'd been seeing for a long time said, I've got bad news. And he said, I'm going to prescribe you 3 medications. They have these side effects. None of them sounded great. The co-pays were all like $40-50 each. So there was going to be a new financial burden, a diminishing of my abilities, physically, emotionally, and apparently neurologically, because these 3 medicines had those side effects. And he said, I'll just tell you what I tell everyone, but no one listens. You could also just change your diet and exercise, and all this will go away. So I did.
And I think that's the hardest part, because that's a simple solution. But it's not, because we have such a strong relationship with food. Yeah.
And addiction. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
A negative
Not a healthy relationship.
Correct. Yeah. And so you think, I should just eat this way. But if it were that easy, everybody would be healthy.
You're right. You're right. And even though I worked in a 3-star restaurant and I was making some of the most lavish food in New York City at that time, I didn't have a healthy diet. And so I did something very, very strict and bold to start, which was the Atkins Diet. And that morphed into just eating better and exercise. And eventually I started doing triathlons and Ironman, and which led to learning a lot about diet and how to fix foods and how to make foods that taste like comfort foods that we all love but shouldn't eat, but are good for you. And I've written 9 books now about it, and my last one is called Rocco's Keto Comfort Food Diet, and that came out in March, just before and the next one's coming out in about a year. So I've really enjoyed writing books. When I was a kid, I didn't know that writing books would ever be a possibility. For me, my father, who wanted to be an attorney himself, never had the opportunity to go to school, and he always regretted that because he got stuck in World War II Italy, and he always made me a promise that I would go to college and be a literate, functioning adult. And so writing a book was an especially significant accomplishment for me, and he got to see that. Him and my mom both did.
That's wonderful. So,
and it all comes from cooking.
Right. What was the process of that? Like, you had this idea, you wanted to write this book, or somebody approached you for it?
I was running a restaurant called Union Pacific. It was a 3-star restaurant in New York City. And about 2 years into it, a few people said, you should write about what you do here. And I remember thinking and telling them, I don't really know what I'm doing here. I'm just working on instinct. I'd worked for a number of really great chefs at that point, and I had developed my own personal point of view. And I think when you're able to merge point of view with craft, you start to, take your creations, whatever it is that you're creating, to a different level, a new level, a higher level that hopefully is art of some form, and I was just starting to do that, but I didn't realize what it was that I was doing. I couldn't really put it in words. So about a year later, 3 years into Union Pacific, I finally understood what I was doing, and it turns out one of my best customers was the editor-in-chief of a really great publishing house, and he was one of the people encouraging me to write, but he never told me he was a publisher. And he's one of my best friends to this day, and he published my first book called Flavor, and it's all about how we work with the 4 flavors: sour, salt, sweet, bitter, and how we blend those together in exciting ways to create dishes.
Oh, I love that. Even just thinking about that makes me hungry.
Yeah. So in the book, I propose that a great dish has some combination of those 4 basic flavors, and that there's tension and resolution, and those 4 flavors create the tension and resolution, and so it feels like great music or great art. Makes you feel something. There's a bite, you're confused, then another bite resolves that confusion, and that's what I think great food should taste like.
Sounds like an orchestra.
Something like that. Yeah. I use the music reference. I use the music analogies a lot in that book, and color analogies a lot in the book. So, yeah.
What was the process of writing? So you had this idea, and then you have the editor, and then the actual work, like the meat of the book, writing the recipes, and what was that process
that's
like?
just the tedious, grueling work of writing, sitting down, writing recipes, measuring everything. And at that time, I wasn't counting calories or macro nutrients. So we didn't care at that time about, number of calories, carbs, grams of protein, grams of fat. So it was very easy compared to what I do now, which is like physics almost. Every dish you make, you have to somehow calculate the final result so that it can be classified a keto dish or a low carb dish or sugar-free dish or whatever. But so it took about 2 years of trial and error, working in the basement of the restaurant with a photographer, and with my whole kitchen, to put on paper what we had been working on in the kitchen for years, but simplifying so that a home cook could recreate some of the dishes. And that's, for your first book, there's usually a lot of back and forth with your publisher. They sort of help you decide what can be done by a home cook.
Help you decide.
Yeah, they help you decide and tell you what to do. Yeah.
Yeah.
And now when I write recipes, I'm always thinking of the home cook.
Right.
So a lot of people are surprised at how simple the recipes are now.
Right.
Because I was known for very complicated food, but my cookbooks have very simple recipes in them.
So what inspires you when you're creating recipes?
I'm inspired by the work. I've always been inspired by food, and food continues to inspire me. Ingredients, when I look at food, I feel inspiration. I get ideas. Ideas just pop into my head when I look at anything: an onion, a pomegranate, bay leaf, fresh basil. A place like this, full of inspiration. Everywhere you look, there's something, to do with food here. So at Guy's Ranch Kitchen, that's what I'm talking about. But food since I was very young has always been a source of joy, a source of inspiration. Before I cooked professionally, I got paid at 11, so I consider it professionally. My family cooked all, we were Italians. We lived like Italian farmers. We cooked fresh food. We made our own bread, our own sausage, our own tomato sauce, our own wine. We raised chickens and rabbits and pigeons for food. I mean, I lived in a world very rich with culinary tradition. So I've always had wonderful associations with food.
So one of the projects that we'll do throughout our semester is create our own class cookbook. So every student will create their own one-page recipe of the cookbook. What words of wisdom or recommendation, or what would you tell them?
I would tell them to make sure they have a scale nearby. It's fun to cook without a scale, but you will have to measure things eventually. And sometimes your first draft is the best draft, and you can't improve on your first idea. It's about 50-50 for me, where my first draft is the right draft, and then the rest of the time I have to, tinker and keep adjusting. So work with a gram scale, very important. You'll probably convert it into, ounces and cups at some point, but measuring by grams is the only way to know how much of any ingredient you have in your recipe is, and the only correct way to do it. So weigh everything, scale everything out, be meticulous about that, write it down, take pictures, take lots of pictures, and then taste and make sure the recipes reflect your idea of them. Because it's, for people who are inspired by food, we see an apple, come up with an apple recipe, and it doesn't always taste like what you expected. So you almost always have to adjust, be prepared for, what I consider a somewhat grueling process of tasting and R&D and making adjustments and starting over. Very important, because people are relying on these recipes to be perfect and workable, and they don't...
And be able to replicate
Right,
it.
to be able to exactly replicate the dish that's in the photo, and they should be part of your R&D team.
Right.
You should deliver them a perfect record of whatever recipe it is that you're working on. And it's okay to do it 50, 100 times. Sometimes it takes 50 times.
Right. I think we live in a world so much where we expect instant gratification, and the first time we do it should be the best time. And I think that a lot of times our youth is not aware. They haven't learned yet that when you're doing something, it's practice over and over and over again to perfect whatever it is you're doing. And a lot of times that practice is making mistakes and then learning from them and reflecting and improving. And so it's what I'm really trying to convey with them in cooking, that it's okay if you make a mistake. That's how you learn. Then we do it again.
For sure. Yeah, it's not about the mistake. It's about what you do after you make the mistake, right? Yeah. And I don't think I think you should characterize, or I don't characterize over salting something or using too much of a spice as a mistake per se. It's just part of the learning process, right? When you're a cook or a painter or a carpenter or anyone that works in a field that is borderline art, it's not really a mistake. It's just you learning your craft and your point of view trying to come out at the same time, and that takes years. That takes 10, 20 years sometimes. If you think you cook well now, wait till 10 years from now. You're going to be so happy with what you're doing 10 years from now, because it just gets better and better and better. And this is a skill that you can never master.
Which is so great.
I think it's great. Most people are frustrated, but I think it's wonderful. I think cooking eggs is still impossible. So, I mean, every time I cook sunny side up eggs, it's like the first time, because it's very challenging, and the moisture level is different every time, and the humidity in the room affects how they cook. There's so many variables, so it makes it either really annoying or really fun.
Right.
Yeah. If it makes if it makes you feel really annoyed and you never feel the fun, probably not right for this.
Right.
You probably should think of something else.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
A long day of working, whether in the kitchen or your cookbook creation. What is a comfort meal you want to come home to or create?
You already know the answer. It's pizza. Pizza is my guilty pleasure.